Can you take us through some of the most common misconceptions around expropriation in the South African context?
There are a number of misconceptions. I do believe that probably the two most important ones is that the Act, or the fact that we now have an Act, gives the government essentially a blank check to pick and choose properties to seize. And I think the second one would probably be that there's no compensation payable. So both of those are far more nuanced. Again, as we mentioned, there has to be an empowering legislation. It's not an extra legal process. It's still a highly regulated technical process where you can approach the courts at any point. And the compensation one is a lot more nuanced. Even though there's talk of nil compensation and the drafters may have envisioned some circumstances that would lead to nil compensation, ultimately the fact is that a court decides and it must be just and equitable in all instances.
Theo, what have you as AgBiz and the broader agricultural community identified as the biggest risks within the expropriation debate and the processes surrounding it?
So the Act, we believe, to a large extent is legally sound, but the impact of expropriation, the impact of the Act will be directly proportionate to how often it gets used and the types of offers of compensation that we get from the state. So again, expropriation should be the last resort, and it's legally speaking, it has to be the last resort. But if it is used often, then perhaps it can have an impact. And the offers of compensation is probably the most important element. So if the state adopts the approach to say, we're going to offer you minimal compensation, even nil compensation, and leave it up to the owner or the mortgage bond holder to take us to court, obviously that will cause a huge amount of conflict and litigation. We hope that won't be the case. We trust they won't be the case because I don't think that's the intention of the legislation. But that's ultimately, time will tell, I think, how it gets used, and once the court has had the chance to interpret the legislation and apply a couple cases, we'll also get a lot better indication of what the courts deem as just and equitable compensation.